Hi everybody, I want to welcome you to the 2022 Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Breakfast Celebration. I regret that it's just a virtual celebration this year instead of a face-to-face breakfast. Our hope is that in 2023 we can regather again, but that doesn't lessen the impact of what you're watching today in this virtual situation. We have three folks that you will see interviews of, Caprice Jones, Louie Meyer, and Dr. Brian Halstus. All have interesting stories related to the impact of Dr. King on their lives. Let me get some preliminaries out of the way. We need to give a shout out of thanks to a couple of organizations that help us every year. Faces and Voices is has the primary responsibility for this event every year, but we can't do that on our own. So the Dubuque Community School District provides lots of resources for this, especially the video and editing and creativity and artistry. That's what they've provided this year. Community Foundation always helps us out. First Baptist Church always helps us out. NAACP, the community chapter, helps us out. And then Multicultural Family Center as well has helped us out this year. So all those folks have helped us out. We're thankful to them that we can get this done every year. Now, our first speaker today is an interesting person by the name of Caprice Jones, who is the founder of an organization in town called the Fountain of Youth. Caprice has an interesting story. His story starts out in a place where you would not see the Fountain of Youth coming from this individual, but he has gone through a huge change in his life, and he's a blessing to our city. So let's hear Caprice's story.
Martin Luther King Jr. has shown me through his life journey as another man that anything is possible through God, and that life is worth living. And also, ultimately, where do we go from here? Well, I did my first armed robbery at like 12 years old. And so I actually stuck somebody up on the south side with a gun. And it was like a smooth situation for me, so I didn't feel no fear. And I continued to do that. I went to prison for guns. I went to prison for burglaries. I went to prison for all the different things that was considered cool in the world that I was growing up in. Just crime was like normal when it's supposed to be abnormal. The moment when I was so disappointed in myself, and I felt like I failed everyone, but ultimately I believe I had failed God. And I had really worked hard to try to be walking on a straight and narrow before I got locked back up, because I was getting locked up every time I got out. Basically, I was wondering, like, why am I here? But I don't want to die, and I didn't know how to keep going on. But yet, if I don't die, then I had to live. And so I began to just trust in my faith, and also trust God to lead me every step of the way. I'm in prison where I began to discover my potential and also my purpose. And that's what led to ultimately, I believe, me having a vision to start the Fountain Youth program. The Fountain of Youth is a place where a person could come to experience the downpouring of love. We work with all walks of life: white, black, Marshallese, Hispanic, Asian, everyone that's basically needing help. People that's needing inspiration, motivation, hope, and overall unconditional love. It's always a process of patience and growing in that process. And they're willing to give someone a chance to actually pour it into them. And I was inspired by Martin Luther King Jr. all my life, so I consider him to be my mentor. And as I study him now, I see the things that he left off at that I'm picking up. Being steadfast in the mission of eradicating generational poverty, one person at a time. I know that it won't end just overnight with everyone, but I believe that it can end overnight with someone, which is a part of everyone. And just the drive that he had is a part of my drive, and I'm inspired by him, far as to know, I'm willing to die for what I believe in. And that's not something that a person can just wake up thinking to do, because I truly believe in changing the mindsets that contribute to generational poverty. And that's something that I never understood when I was growing up, that I was not like comfortable or satisfied with handouts. And I was growing up needing them. I believe that the community of Dubuque is blessed. And for me, coming to Dubuque, I was already aware that this was gonna be like my promised land. I see beneath the ignorance that was a stain on Dubuque, and I see the hope of the future for my children's children. My first time homeowner here, Dubuque allows an opportunity for every individual to make their way. It's not easy, and it's not a handout, but they offer a hand up because they give an opportunity to an individual that's not from here to see that they can be somebody. So Dubuque it's an oasis of joy. I'm Caprice Jones, and I'm moving toward action.
I find Caprice's story to be absolutely amazing. If I had met Caprice in those South Side days, I wouldn't have wanted to have anything to do with him. And yet here he is, really an important part of our community here in Dubuque. Two things that really hit me: anything is possible through God, and you can see it in his life that, I mean, many people would have just written him off, and here he is, the founder of an important organization in our town. And the other thing is, he said that he sees Dubuque as a promised land. I've met a lot of Dubuquers and they wouldn't describe Dubuque that way, but he got a second chance here. And I think we need to value our community. Our next speaker is Louie Meyer, and he's coming from a little different direction. Louie, I hope his persona doesn't put you off, because his persona doesn't speak to who he really is. Louie has a trip from White Shirt Wednesdays to Dr. King celebration, and that's a huge journey. Let's hear what Louie has to say.
For most of my 42 years, I've been in Dubuque. I'm moving into freshman year of high school, which would have been like 1992, 93, shortly after all the cross burnings and stuff in Dubuque. I became involved with some other students, taking part in activities such as wearing white shirts on Wednesdays, shaving our heads, engaging in acts of violence. You know, basically anything that you can think of that a knucklehead high school kid would do to make a name for himself, I did it. I hate to blame it on environment, but I think Dubuque recognized at that time that we were lacking diversity in our community, and they were making efforts to address that. So we were all going through these growing pains, and instead of trying to understand better, I was just getting angry and using it as fuel for hate, which, you know, at the time seemed like, you know, the whole world was against us and we were the minority. Yeah, so when I was in Davenport, I wasn't full-blown homeless. I had some couches to sleep on, that sort of thing, but there was a few nights where I did find myself sleeping outside. But it was at that point that I met a few folks in the neighborhood that were willing to basically let me stay with them rent-free, and these were people of color. So that kind of took me by surprise. I was battling with some other things at the time too, addiction and that sort of thing. And once you kind of get lost in an addiction, you really start to realize there is a lot of judgment that goes around that isn't always necessary. So those two things kind of came together at the same time, where I realized that not only were people judging me unnecessarily, but I was also doing that to others. So I would say that was probably the real catalyst in my life, is when I got so sick of people judging me that it made me realize that I was doing that to other people. I just really wanted to humble myself down and let people know that I'm not no better than anybody else. And I guess that's what I take away from Dr. King, is really just judge people based on the content of their character. So then that gets me thinking in a global sense. If we were to respect the people that pick our food, the guy that flips the burgers, I think a lot of the divisions that we see would be lessened. Dr. King talking about getting to the mountaintop, I think, the next step would be to make sure that we're going back down and bringing everyone back up with us. But that starts kind of in an individual basis. If you're not seeing the best in everyone and not trying to put aside your biases and maybe try to educate yourself a little bit more on the differences that you might have with coworkers, students, whatever, we're really kind of missing out on a great opportunity, I think. And that great opportunity is the hope that Dr. King really inspired in people, and that is that someday, maybe we can get to a point where we use all of our vast resources to spread, goodwill. I'm Louie Meyer, and I'm moving toward action.
Louie Story is just as powerful as Caprice's. The thing that really strikes me about Louie's story is this moment in his life when he's somewhat semi-homeless, and the people who allow him, give him a warm place to sleep, are African American, and suddenly he's no longer judging by outward appearances, but he's looking at people's hearts. And that's what he's asking everybody to do. Isn't that what Dr. King has asked us to do? Look at our character, not our outward appearance, but who are we? Get to know our story, get to know individual stories. So that's really great. Our last speaker is Dr. Brian Halstus, who comes from a whole different place, I think, in life. I think that's fair. But the moment that changed him is this reality of the knowledge of a lynching that occurred here in our community of Nathaniel Morgan back in the 1800s. And he's going to talk about how important history is for us to be able to move on. You just can't be ignorant of history or we just keep repeating it, right? That's what we always say. So let's listen to Dr. Halstus.
Early 2018, I think it came in my email inbox that there was a new memorial that was about to open in Montgomery, Alabama, called the Memorial for Peace and Justice, which was going to be the first, a national memorial, first one focused on remembering the lives of those who had been lynched. And I was aware that we had a lynching here in Dubuque in 1840, but I hadn't thought about the connection between this memorial in Montgomery and the fact that we had a lynching in our own community. And so that was kind of the starting point. I thought, well, we should do something. We want to create a memorial that is a site where people will come and will learn about Nathaniel Morgan and will reflect about his life, but also reflect on the victims of racial violence in general. Nathaniel Morgan and his spouse Charlotte lived in Galena, and so Dubuque as a town emerges in the early 1830s, and they're here in Dubuque. And he worked at a hotel. He was pulled out of his house by people who accused him of stealing a trunk of clothing, and said that because I think that at the hotel, and then they proceeded to beat him and try to get him to confess. It says something about the climate in which people lived, and about the systems in place and the ideas that were circulating that would enable this kind of violence. And I think about, the act of violence that killed Nathaniel Morgan. It was horrific enough that he died. I mean, any murder is horrific. But the fact that these people who murdered him did it in broad daylight and in the heart of our community and dragged him from place to place, and were doing it with lots of other people observing, just as happens in so many of these lynchings of the past. And then when all was said and done and he died, they were never brought to justice. They were brought to court and were acquitted because they didn't mean to do it. If you suppress the ugly things that have happened, it comes out in ugly ways, and that you need to confront things in order to move beyond those things. And so I think horrible things that have happened in our past are no different, that we see the legacy, the violence that we see around the country today didn't spring out of nothing. It is we've inherited from the past. It's very easy to be consumed by anger at people who do hateful things, and it's very difficult to be compassionate toward those people. So my hope is that a memorial like this, that we would keep Dr. King's message on love, and that loving everyone and finding ways of even reaching people who are perhaps averse to having a memorial like this, or who are maybe even say hateful things about it, or try to deface it, or do all they can to prevent it from happening, trying to find ways of reaching those people as well. It's a message that comes through often in Dr. King's speeches is the emphasis on love and loving one another, and that love is going to win the day, and love is stronger than hate, and you need to identify hate when you see it and just call it out for what it is. And also recognizing that hate is not deeply rooted in people, but it doesn't represent their entirety, and that even people who've done hateful things are redeemable and they have humanity. And so this message of love and loving your neighbor and loving people that have done wrong to you, I think is really powerful. I'm Brian Halstos, and I'm moving toward action.
Wow. Dr. Brian Halstos' story is really powerful as well. I think we've had three powerful stories. The story of the lynching of Nathaniel Morgan, the thing that really struck me in Dr. Halstos' commentary is love. Loving, look at our two first folks. There's love given to them, and they're able to accomplish things. I guess the other way to look at it is people are redeemable. Let's just not throw people away. And that's really what Dr. King is talking about. He understands when a whole race is thrown away. And his whole point was, no, please don't do that. These are valuable people. All people are redeemable. All people have potential. Let's work with them and let's find out what it's like. Love them and find out what their story is. Listen before you speak. All that kind of stuff I think is so important in what's going on in these three stories. I hope you enjoyed this year's event. And again, I pray that next year we can meet at a face-to-face breakfast with a speaker. But if not, we'll still have a high-quality option for you virtually. And I pray that you'll have a great 2022. Again, my name is Tim Bees, and I'm moving toward action.